Europe, July 1940, a continent in turmoil. A man obsessed with power. The world on the brink. Adolf Hitler's journey from a failed art student to the most feared dictator in history is one of the darkest chapters of the modern world. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler served as a frontline soldier during the First World War. The war shaped him, hardened him, and left him full of bitterness after Germany's defeat. In the years following the war, Germany suffered severe economic collapse, political chaos, and humiliation under the Treaty of Versailles. This was a nation hungry for change, and a man like Hitler knew how to feed that hunger. He joined the German Workers' Party in 1919, a small nationalist group. With fiery speeches, radical ideas, and charisma that drew desperate crowds, Hitler transformed that group into the Nazi Party. He promised a better Germany, one free from the shame of Versailles, one cleansed of its so-called internal enemies, especially Jews and communists. He blamed them for everything: Germany's defeat, its economic troubles, and its lost glory. By 1933, Hitler had risen to chancellor. A suspicious fire at the Reichstag gave him the perfect excuse to seize emergency powers. Civil liberties vanished. Political opponents were arrested or killed. Through fear, propaganda, and the support of powerful industrialists and generals, Hitler established a dictatorship. And he wasn't satisfied with just ruling Germany. His ambition reached far beyond. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, triggering World War II. Germany's military strategy, called Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, overwhelmed enemy nations with shocking speed and force. Poland fell in weeks. By 1940, Hitler had conquered Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even France. The world watched in disbelief as Nazi flags waved over Paris. In Britain, the only major power left standing, Prime Minister Winston Churchill refused to back down. Hitler prepared to invade the British Isles, but Britain's Royal Air Force fought fiercely. The Battle of Britain was the first time Hitler's forces were stopped. Bombs rained down on London, but the British people held on. Hitler's plan to conquer the UK collapsed. Frustrated, Hitler turned his eyes eastward to the vast lands of the Soviet Union. He saw Slavic peoples as inferior and the Soviet regime as weak. But more than anything, he saw opportunity. He wanted land, oil, and the destruction of communism. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. Over 3 million German troops crossed into Soviet territory. Cities fell quickly. Soviet soldiers were captured in the hundreds of thousands. For a moment, it looked like Hitler would succeed. But the deeper the Germans pushed, the more they ran into problems. The Russian winter hit with brutal force. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. German equipment froze. Troops suffered frostbite. Supplies ran out. In Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest battles in history unfolded. German and Soviet forces fought building to building, room to room. Civilians starved and died in the crossfire. After months of fighting, the Soviet army surrounded the Germans. Hitler ordered them to fight to the death, refusing retreat. But in early 1943, the German Sixth Army surrendered. It was the first major defeat of the Nazi war machine. Back in Berlin, Hitler was furious. He blamed his generals, his allies, and everyone except himself. He grew paranoid, convinced the traitors were everywhere. Meanwhile, resistance movements across Europe grew stronger. In France, Yugoslavia, and Poland, partisans struck back with sabotage, assassinations, and ambushes. Even inside Germany, some officers began to plot Hitler's downfall. On July 20, 1944, Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb in Hitler's war meeting. The explosion killed several people, but Hitler survived, protected by a thick wooden table leg. His survival convinced him he was chosen by fate. In response, he ordered a massive purge. Thousands were executed. Hitler's grip tightened. His mind grew darker. While the war raged on, a far greater horror unfolded behind closed doors. Under Hitler's orders, millions of Jews were being rounded up, deported, and murdered. The Holocaust, the systematic genocide of European Jews, became one of the greatest crimes in human history. Men, women, and children were sent to ghettos, then to concentration camps. Places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became death factories. Gas chambers operated day and night. Bodies were burned in massive ovens. Millions perished in silence. By late 1944, the tide of war had turned. Allied forces, including American, British, and Canadian troops, stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. After brutal fighting, they broke through Nazi defenses and began liberating France. Paris was free by August. German forces retreated in chaos. In the east, the Red Army advanced like a storm. Soviet troops pushed through Poland, Romania, and Hungary. German cities were bombed relentlessly. In Berlin, civilians lived in terror. Food was scarce. Bomb shelters overflowed. Death was everywhere. Yet Hitler refused to surrender. He believed Germany must either conquer or be destroyed. He trusted no one but his closest followers, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister who still preached Nazi victory, and Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. In January 1945, Hitler moved into the Führerbunker, an underground shelter beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. It was cold, dark, and claustrophobic. The once proud dictator now lived in fear. His body trembled. His voice was weak. His doctors fed him countless pills. He rarely went outside. Maps on the wall showed armies that no longer existed. He ordered imaginary divisions into battle. No one dared tell him the truth. By April, Soviet forces reached the city's outskirts. Artillery shells shook the bunker. Smoke filled the sky. Hitler's empire was crumbling around him. But he still gave speeches to his staff, still blamed Jews and generals, still refused to face reality. Then came the final collapse. On April 28, 1945, Hitler learned that his ally, Benito Mussolini, had been captured and executed by Italian partisans. His body was hanged upside down in a public square. Hitler knew what would happen if he was captured. The next day, he married Eva Braun, his longtime companion. The ceremony was small and grim. Champagne was served, but there was no celebration. That same night, Hitler dictated his political will. He refused to surrender. He blamed Jews for everything. He insisted he had done nothing wrong. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops closed in just blocks away, Hitler said goodbye to his staff. He and Eva Braun went into his private room. A shot rang out. When the door was opened, Hitler was slumped on the couch, blood on his temple. Eva had taken cyanide. Hitler had shot himself. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets, taken outside the bunker, doused in petrol, and set on fire. Flames consumed what remained of the man who had once dreamed of ruling the world. As the fire burned, Soviet troops advanced. The war in Europe was almost over. But the consequences of Hitler's actions, the deaths, the destruction, the genocide, would last forever. His reign ended not in glory, but in flame, fear, and failure. But this was only the end of his life. The story of how the world rebuilt, how the guilty were hunted, and how a shattered continent tried to heal, that story was just beginning.